The night was colder than usual, the kind of cold that seeped through your skin and settled deep in your bones. The city streets were mostly empty, the occasional car splashing through puddles left by the evening rain. Streetlights buzzed faintly, flickering as if struggling to stay awake. She hurried down the sidewalk, pulling her coat tighter around her body. It had been a long day at work, and all she wanted was to get home, take a warm shower, and curl up with a book. But something made her stop. There, sitting on the curb near a closed cafe, was a man. His clothes were ragged, his hands buried in his lap as if he were trying to disappear into himself. A few people walked past him without so much as a glance, their eyes trained ahead as if he didn't exist. She hesitated. She didn't normally stop for strangers, especially not at night, but there was something about him, something different. Maybe it was the way he sat there, not begging, not even looking up, just existing in a world that had clearly forgotten him. She took a deep breath and walked over. "Excuse me, are you okay?" The man didn't respond at first. Then slowly, he lifted his head. His eyes, dark, tired, yet oddly piercing, met hers. For a moment, he just stared. Then he spoke, his voice low and rough, as if he hadn't used it in days. "I'm fine." It was a lie. She could see that. She glanced at the closed cafe, then back at him. "Have you eaten?" Silence. She sighed, already making a decision she hadn't planned. "Wait here." A few minutes later, she returned with a warm meal from a nearby food stand. A simple thing. Rice, some grilled chicken, a bottle of water, but enough to fight off the cold creeping into his body. She handed it to him, expecting hesitation, maybe even rejection. But to her surprise, he took it with a quiet "thank you." She sat beside him, ignoring the dampness of the curb. "What's your name?" Again, that silence. Then, after a long pause, he said, "Does it matter?" She tilted her head. "It does to me." Another long pause. Then, reluctantly, he muttered, "David." She smiled. "I'm Naomi." David nodded, but he didn't say anything more. He ate in silence, and she let him. There was no need for forced conversation. Sometimes, kindness was enough. After a while, he set the empty container beside him. "You didn't have to do this," he said, his voice quieter now. "I know." She stood, brushing off her coat. "But I wanted to." David looked up at her, his gaze lingering longer than before. Something unreadable passed through his eyes, something almost like recognition, but that didn't make sense. She didn't know him. Finally, he said, "One day I'll repay you in a way you never imagined." She frowned, caught off guard. It wasn't a simple "thank you" or even a promise in the usual sense. It felt heavier, as if it carried a weight she couldn't see. But before she could ask what he meant, he lowered his head again, retreating into himself like before. She let it go. "Take care, David." She turned and walked away, the cold air wrapping around her like a warning. Something about that night stayed with her, but she brushed it off. After all, it was just a small act of kindness. Nothing more. She had no idea how wrong she was. The next day, everything changed. Naomi barely slept that night. She couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the cold that had crept into her bones after sitting on that damp curb for too long. Maybe it was the strange weight in David's words. "One day, I'll repay you in a way you never imagined." She kept hearing it over and over again, the way he had said it, slowly, deliberately, like a promise wrapped in something heavier than gratitude. But that was ridiculous. He was just a man she had helped. Nothing more. By morning, she had convinced herself to forget about it. She slipped into her routine. Hot coffee, a hurried breakfast, and rushing out the door to catch the train. Work was waiting, and she didn't have time to let last night's encounter take up space in her mind. But something felt off. It started small. The moment she stepped outside, she noticed the black SUV parked across the street. It wasn't a car she had seen before. The windows were tinted, and the engine was still running. At first, she thought nothing of it. People parked in front of her building all the time. But when she walked past, she felt eyes on her. She turned her head slightly, just enough to steal a glance. Behind the tinted glass, a shadow moved. Her steps quickened. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe she was imagining things. The train station was crowded as usual. Naomi squeezed into her usual seat by the window and scrolled through her phone, trying to shake the feeling. The train jerked forward, the familiar rhythm of the tracks calming her nerves. But then she saw it again. Through the window, in the moving reflection of the glass, she caught a glimpse of the same black SUV. It was driving parallel to the train, moving slowly, keeping pace. Her heart started to pound. No, this is stupid. It's just a coincidence. And yet, when she arrived at her stop and stepped onto the crowded platform, she couldn't shake the unease crawling under her skin. It was the way people moved around her, the way she felt watched. She turned her head slightly, just enough to catch sight of a man in a dark coat standing near the entrance. He wasn't doing anything suspicious, just standing there, hands in his pockets. But something about him made her uneasy. She turned away quickly, pushing through the crowd, telling herself she was being ridiculous. By the time she reached the office, she had almost convinced herself that she was overthinking. Almost. She sat at her desk, trying to lose herself in work. Numbers, emails, meetings, things that made sense, things that didn't come with cryptic promises from homeless men. Then her boss called her in. "Naomi, close the door," Mr. Wallace said. He was a serious man, the kind who never wasted words. She had worked under him for years, and in all that time, he had never spoken to her in a tone like this. She sat down cautiously. "Is something wrong?" He studied her for a moment, then leaned back in his chair. "I had an interesting phone call this morning." Naomi frowned. "From who?" "That's the thing." He tapped his fingers on the desk. The man didn't say his name, but he made something very clear. "He's extremely interested in you." Her stomach dropped. "What?" she whispered. Mr. Wallace nodded. He didn't give any details, just said that I should keep an eye on Naomi because she might be stepping into something bigger than she realizes. A chill crawled up her spine. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just paranoia anymore. "Naomi," her boss said carefully, "is there something I should know?" She opened her mouth, closed it. What was she supposed to say? That she had given food to a homeless man last night, and now, for some reason, she felt like she was being watched? That some stranger had called her boss to deliver a cryptic warning? It sounded insane. "No," she lied. "Nothing at all." Mr. Wallace studied her for a long moment, then finally nodded. "All right, just be careful." She left his office feeling worse than before. Something was happening, and it had all started the night she met David. But why? By the time her lunch break came, she needed air. She walked outside, hoping the cool breeze would clear her mind. That's when she saw him. Not David, the man in the dark coat. He was across the street, leaning against a lamppost, looking straight at her. Her heart pounded. This wasn't a coincidence. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and did something reckless. She walked straight toward him. If he was watching her, if he was following her, she wanted answers. He didn't move as she approached. He just stood there, his face unreadable. Naomi stopped a few feet away. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man smiled faintly. "You asked the wrong question." Her pulse hammered. "Then what's the right question?" His smile faded. His eyes darkened. "The right question," he said slowly, "is who is David?" Naomi's breath caught. "What?" Before she could finish, the man turned and walked away. Just like that. No explanation, no answers, just another question. And suddenly, she knew. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Naomi stood frozen on the sidewalk, her heart hammering. The man in the dark coat was disappearing into the crowd, walking away like he had never even been there. Like he hadn't just turned her entire world upside down with one chilling question. Who is David? The words replayed in her mind, each time heavier than before. She had asked him for his name. He had said David. But was that even true? She needed to find him. By the time she got off work, the sky was painted in shades of deep orange and gray, the city lights flickering to life. Naomi walked fast, heading straight for the spot where she had first met him, the curb near the closed cafe. But when she got there, he was gone. The spot was empty. No sign of him, no trace that he had ever been there. She bit her lip, scanning the street, checking every shadowed alley, every doorway, hoping for some clue. But there was nothing. David had vanished. She should have let it go. She should have turned around, gone home, and forced herself to forget about this entire bizarre situation. But she couldn't. Something deep inside her whispered that this wasn't just about a homeless man she had helped. It was something more, something bigger. And she wasn't ready to walk away. She turned to leave, but that's when she noticed it. A single folded piece of paper lying on the ground where David had been sitting the night before. Frowning, she picked it up. It wasn't crumpled or torn, like trash that had been tossed aside. It looked deliberate, placed there on purpose. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. One word, a name. Winston. Naomi's pulse jumped. What did it mean? A place? A person? She swallowed hard. There was only one way to find out. She hurried home, her mind racing. The moment she stepped through her apartment door, she grabbed her laptop and typed the name into a search engine. Thousands of results popped up, businesses, historical figures, locations, but none of them seemed relevant. She narrowed her search. Winston, New York City. And then she saw it. A news article. Billionaire Winston Hawthorne declared dead 5 years ago in mysterious disappearance. Naomi's breath caught. Billionaire? Declared dead? What did this have to do with David? She clicked on the article, her eyes scanning rapidly. Winston Hawthorne, heir to the Hawthorne fortune, vanished without a trace 5 years ago. His yacht was found wrecked along the coast, but his body was never recovered. After years of unanswered questions, he was legally declared dead by the state. His company, once a financial empire, was taken over by his younger brother, Charles Hawthorne. Naomi stared at the screen, her mind spinning. It made no sense. Why would David, or whoever he really was, leave her a note with this name? Unless... Her fingers shook as she clicked on an old photo attached to the article. A man in a crisp suit, strong jawline, intense dark eyes. Her stomach flipped. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. She zoomed in. The beard was neatly trimmed, the hair styled differently, the face cleaner. But beneath all of that, it was him. David. Or rather, Winston Hawthorne. Naomi felt dizzy. The man she had given food to. The man who had sat on that cold curb like he had lost everything was a billionaire. A man the world believed was dead. A man who had faked his own death. She slammed her laptop shut, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. This wasn't just some simple act of kindness anymore. She had stumbled into something far, far bigger. And if Winston had gone to such lengths to disappear, someone else was probably looking for him too. Suddenly, the strange SUV, the mysterious phone call to her boss, the man in the dark coat. It all made sense. She wasn't being paranoid. Someone was watching her because she had found him. Her heart pounded as she grabbed her phone. She had to find him before they did. But the moment she reached for her keys, a shadow moved outside her window. She froze. Someone was standing there, watching, waiting. And then, a knock at the door. Her breath hitched. Slow, deliberate. She wasn't alone. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. The knock came again. Slow, deliberate, like whoever was on the other side knew she was standing there, frozen in fear. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The weight of her discovery crushed down on her chest. Winston Hawthorne, the billionaire who had disappeared 5 years ago. The same man she had given food to. The same man she had thought was just another struggling soul on the streets. But now it wasn't just about him. Someone was watching her. Someone had been watching since the moment she got involved. The third knock was louder. Naomi's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. She was seconds away from dialing 911 when, "Naomi, I know you're in there." Her heart stopped. That voice. Deep, rough, familiar. It was him. David, no, Winston. She hesitated for half a second before unlocking the door. The moment she pulled it open, Winston stepped inside, shutting the door behind him in one quick motion. He was out of breath, his hair slightly damp from the misty night air. But his eyes, those same piercing eyes, held something she hadn't seen before. Fear. "I need your help," he said, voice low, urgent. Naomi swallowed hard, her mind still spinning. Why? What's happening? There's no time to explain everything. He glanced at the window, his entire body tense. "But they know I've been talking to you." Naomi's stomach twisted. "Who?" He exhaled sharply. "The people who wanted me dead." The room fell into thick silence. She felt like the walls were closing in on her. "Winston, if what I read is true, your family thinks you're dead. Your company moved on. You had a whole life before you disappeared. Why?" She stopped, shaking her head. "Why are you on the streets? What happened to you?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then finally his jaw clenched. "I was betrayed." The weight of those 3 words sent a shiver down Naomi's spine. "My brother," Winston continued, voice tight with restrained anger. "Charles. He set everything up, the boat accident, the reports, the entire disappearance. I trusted him, and he used that to take everything from me." Naomi's breath caught. "But why?" Winston gave a bitter smile. "Power. Money. The usual things. My father had left the company in my hands, but Charles, he wanted control, so he made sure I disappeared." Naomi shook her head in disbelief. "But 5 years, Winston? 5 years, and you never tried to come back? I did. His fists clenched. Twice. Both times, I barely made it out alive. The gravity of his words sank in. If Charles had gone this far, it meant he wasn't just willing to steal, he was willing to kill. And now Naomi was caught in the middle of it. She stepped back, running a hand through her hair. What do you need from me? Winston met her eyes. A chance. She frowned. A chance? A chance to expose the truth, to prove I'm alive, to take back what's mine. He inhaled sharply. But I can't do it alone. Naomi's mind raced. She was just an ordinary woman working an ordinary job. She had no experience with billionaires, betrayals, or whatever dangerous mess this was. But something deep inside her wouldn't let her walk away. She had seen him at his lowest, had spoken to him when he had nothing. Not as Winston Hawthorne, the billionaire, but as David, the man who had needed kindness. And now he needed her again. Naomi took a deep breath. Tell me what to do. A flicker of relief crossed Winston's face. We need to go somewhere safe first, he said. Somewhere we can't be tracked. She nodded, grabbing her coat. But just as they turned toward the door, a loud crash. The window shattered. Naomi screamed as Winston yanked her back, shielding her as shards of glass exploded into the room. Footsteps. Fast. Heavy. Someone was coming. We have to go, Winston hissed. Before Naomi could even process what was happening, Winston grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the back door. She didn't question it. She ran. They burst into the alleyway, Winston moving like a man who had done this before. Naomi's heart pounded as she heard voices behind them, sharp commands. Someone was chasing them. Keep running, Winston urged, his grip tight around her wrist. They zigzagged through the city streets, past neon-lit signs and dark alleyways, Winston leading her through back routes and side roads like he had memorized every inch of the city. Finally, they stopped behind an old abandoned building, both gasping for breath. Naomi pressed a hand to her chest. Who were they? Winston shook his head. Charles's men. He glanced around. We can't stay here. We need to get out of the city. Naomi's mind reeled. This was real. This was happening. And she had just thrown herself right into the middle of it. But looking at Winston, at the determination in his eyes, the fire in his expression, she knew there was no turning back now. She had helped a homeless man. Now she was running for her life with a billionaire in hiding. And it was only the beginning.